Welcome to our presentation, Americans with Disabilities Act, by Ali Sharbach, Amy Vothier, and Adina Ware. Today we will share with you how this act came about, what the act is, and how it has impacted people since the enactment. We hope you enjoy. The Americans with Disabilities Act, better known as ADA, was signed into law by President George Bush in 1990. This was the first civil rights law designated for individuals with disabilities, and would prove to have a huge impact, providing these individuals with the same rights as every other American. In order to qualify for the ADA, you must have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of major life activities, as well as have a history or record of such impairment, or be a person who is perceived by others as having such an impairment. During the era that this law was passed in, there was a lot of change, improvement, and progression in the United States. In this era of the late 80s and early 90s, the United States was making strong recovery from the recession and was building up their financial and social strength. Certain aspects of the nation were strong, such as having low inflation as well as low unemployment levels. During this time, there was plenty of improvement and advancement, not only in technology. Some of the largest things that advanced was research and mainly the internet. Along with the advancements in medicine and technology came growth in jobs as well. Not only were there many new jobs popping up for all new advancements, there was a low unemployment rate. Overall, life in the late 80s and 90s in the United States was a time of improvement and growth and advancement. Following the Age Discrimination Claims Assistance Act of 1988, many people were beginning to wonder how it was okay to discriminate in any way towards those with disabilities. Along with the time of change came a desired change to alter the way the disabled were being treated. The law was created to solve numerous problems that fall under 5 main categories. The problems that the law addresses is primarily dealing with discrimination in employment, public service, public accommodations, telecommunication, and other miscellaneous provisions. In 1973, there was a change in how those with disabilities were viewed. This stemmed from Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act that banned discrimination on the basis of disability by recipients of federal funds. This was truly the first time that this exclusion and segregation of those with disabilities was seen as discrimination, and thus there was a problem to solve. The problem stemmed from the thought that those who suffered from mental or physical limitations were automatically excluded from education and employment opportunities. This was not a consequence of them being disabled, but rather something that society decided to take away and deprive them of by placing social boundaries on what those with disabilities can have or do. Yet another issue that needed to be addressed was how those with disabilities were separated and grouped based off of a particular disability they had and the specific needs of that disability, instead of being seen as a whole group or class, more specifically a minority group. According to Disability Rights, Education and Defense Fund, Section 504 also made it very clear that while the major physical and mental variations in different disabilities, people with disabilities as a group face similar discrimination in employment, education, and access to society. By doing this, it helped to lead the nation in the ADA in 1990, which would help face the problems that the United States was encountering. There are 5 classifications that go along with the ADA. These are listed as titles. The following definitions of each act have been taken from the ADA website to give you a better understanding of each act. Title I requires employers with 15 or more employees to provide qualified individuals with disabilities an equal opportunity to benefit from the full range of employment-related opportunities available to others. For example, it prohibits discrimination in recruitment, hiring, promotions, training, pay, social activities, and other privileges of employment. It restricts questions that can be asked about an applicant's disability before a job offer is made, and it requires that employers make reasonable accommodation to the known physical or mental limitations of otherwise qualified individuals with disabilities, unless it results in undue hardship. Religious entities with 15 or more employees are covered under Title I. Title II covers all activities of state and local governments, regardless of the government entity's size or receipt of federal funding. Title II requires that state and local governments give people with disabilities an equal opportunity to benefit from all of their programs, services, and activities. For example, public education, employment, transportation, recreation, healthcare, social services, courts, voting, and town meetings. State and local governments are required to follow specific architectural standards in the new construction and alteration of their buildings. They must also relocate programs or otherwise provide access to inaccessible older buildings and communicate effectively with people who have hearing, vision, or speech disabilities. Public entities are not required to take action that would result in undue financial and administrative burdens. They are required to make reasonable modifications to policies, practices, and procedures where necessary to avoid discrimination unless they can demonstrate that doing so would fundamentally alter the nature of the service, program, or activity being provided. The transportation provision of Title II cover public transportation services such as city buses and public rail transit, for example, subways, commuter rails, or Amtrak. Public transportation authorities may not discriminate against people with disabilities in the provision of their services. They must comply with requirements for accessibility in newly purchased vehicles, make good faith efforts to purchase or lease accessible used buses, remanufacture buses in an accessible manner, and, unless it would result in an undue burden, provide paratransit where they operate fixed bus routes or rail systems. Paratransit is a service where individuals who are unable to use the regular transit system independently because of physical or mental impairment are picked up and dropped off at their destinations. Title III covers businesses and nonprofit services providers that are public accommodations, privately operated entities offering certain types of courses and examinations, privately operated transportation and commercial facilities. Public accommodations are private entities who own, lease to, or operate facilities such as restaurants, retail stores, hotels, movie theaters, private schools, convention centers, doctors' offices, homeless shelters, transportation depots, zoos, funeral homes, daycare centers, and recreation facilities including sports stadiums and fitness clubs. Transportation services provided by private entities are also covered by Title III. Public accommodation must comply with basic non-discrimination requirements that prohibit exclusion, segregation, and unequal treatment. They must also comply with specific requirements related to architectural standards for new and altered buildings, reasonable modifications to policies, practices, and procedures, effective communication with people with hearing, vision, or speech difficulties, and other accessible requirements. Additionally, public accommodation must remove barriers in existing buildings where it is easy to do so without much difficulty or expense, given the public accommodations resources. Courses and examinations related to professional, educational, or trade-related applications, licensing, certifications, or credentialing must be provided in place and manner accessible to people with disabilities, or alternative accessible arrangements must be offered. Commercial facilities such as factories and warehouses must comply with ADA's architectural standards for new construction and alteration. Title IV addresses telephone and television access for people with hearing and speech disabilities. It requires common carriers, or telephone companies, to establish interstate and intrastate telecommunication relay services, or TRS, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. TRS enables callers with hearing and speech disabilities who use TTYs, also known as TDDs, and callers who use voice telephones to communicate with each other through a third-party communications assistant. The Federal Communications Commission, also known as the FCC, has set minimum standards for TRS services. Title IV also requires closed captioning of federally funded public service announcements. Section Section 255 and Section 251A, number 2, of the Communications Act of 1934, as amended by the Telecommunications Act of 1996, require manufacturers of telecommunications equipment and providers of telecommunications services to ensure that such equipment and services are accessible to and usable by persons with disabilities. If readily achievable, these amendments ensure that people with disabilities will have access to a broad range of products and services such as telephones, cell phones, pagers, call waiting, and operator services that were often inaccessible to many users with disabilities. Finally, the last section is Title V, which discusses miscellaneous provisions. This captures anything that doesn't fall under the previous categories. This could also help to tie these laws from state to state and create consistency regardless of the state. This law has played a huge role in 1990, from 1990 all the way to today, where its effects is just as present as it was then. Working in human resources has a lot to do with knowing what individuals deserve legally. Knowing what exact actions can correlate to the ADA can help those working in human resources to not only protect those with disabilities, but to inform and educate those without disabilities. According to our text, Denisi, page 37, one survey found that of 12.2 million Americans not working because of disabilities, 8.2 million would have preferred to work. Similarly, another survey found that almost 80% of all managers surveyed found the overall performance of their disabled workers to be good to excellent. Having these laws in place protects individuals from being labeled based off of a physical or mental condition and allows them to be the employee, citizen, or individual they want to be without being restrained by a stigma. Thank you for taking the time to view our presentation. We look forward to your feedback.